When I bought the old farmhouse at the edge of Maple Creek, I thought I was saving a piece of history, not stepping into a nightmare. The place was quiet, forgotten, and falling apart, until the HOA showed up. The lady from across the road, perfectly dressed and smiling too much, pointed at the house and said, "You can't touch that. That's my husband." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her, but she wasn't joking. That single sentence changed everything: the rules, the neighbors, and my life. So, what was she really protecting? When I first saw the farmhouse, it didn't look like much. The roof sagged under decades of neglect, ivy curled across the windows, and the front porch leaned like it was tired of standing. But beneath the dust and silence, I saw something no one else did: a heartbeat. I'd been looking for a quiet escape from city noise, a place where I could breathe again. After losing my father the year before, something in me needed peace, something old, grounded, and real. That farmhouse, sitting alone at the edge of Maple Creek, felt like it was waiting for me. The realtor barely looked up from her clipboard when she showed me around. "Place has been empty for a long time," she said. "Locals say the husband who built it never left. You know how small towns are. They love their stories." I smiled politely. Ghost stories didn't scare me. Paperwork did. A few weeks later, the farmhouse was mine. The first morning I spent there, the air smelled like pine and old wood. The boards creaked with every step, the kind of sound that reminds you how much life a place has lived through. I started small, cleaning out the rooms, scrubbing away years of dust, peeling back the layers of old paint. Each wall felt like a page in a forgotten book. The neighbors noticed me quickly. There weren't many houses nearby, maybe 6 or 7 along the winding gravel road. Some waved when they drove past, others just slowed down, watching. You can always feel it when the place has its own way of welcoming strangers. Then there was her, the HOA president. Her name was Linda. Late 50s, neat hair, pearl earrings, and a clipboard she carried like a badge of honor. She introduced herself the day after I moved in, walking up my driveway as if she already owned it. "Welcome to Maple Creek Estates," she said, smiling with just enough warmth to make me wonder if it was real. She handed me a folder thick with papers: community guidelines, meeting schedules, landscaping standards. I didn't think much of it then. Every community has rules, right? I figured she was just being thorough. But there was something in her tone. The way she said, "We take pride in preserving our history here." It wasn't a suggestion. It was a warning disguised as hospitality. The next few weeks were quiet. I worked during the day, painted the walls at night, and started restoring the porch that had nearly collapsed. It was peaceful, the kind of peace that feels earned. Then little things started happening. A note appeared on my door one morning. Exterior paint color must be approved by HOA before renovation. Then another: unapproved construction materials found on property. And another: violation of Restoration Code Section 4.3. Contact HOA immediately. It didn't make sense. I wasn't changing the house, I was saving it. But every note carried the same tone. Polite on the surface, but heavy with control. It felt less like guidance and more like someone reminding me I didn't belong. And then one afternoon, I caught Linda standing at the edge of my property, just staring. She wasn't taking notes, she wasn't inspecting anything. She was looking at the house. Not at what I'd done to it, but at it. I waved. She didn't wave back. The next day, she knocked on my door with 2 HOA members. That's when she said the words that would start everything. "You can't touch that. That's my husband." At first, I thought she meant it figuratively. Maybe she was talking about history or ownership or pride. But the way she looked at the house, almost like it was alive, told me there was something deeper. Something personal. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about rules. It was about possession. At first, I tried to brush it off. The notes, the warnings, the subtle glances from across the street. It's what every new homeowner deals with, right? New community, new rules, new personalities. But with Linda, the HOA president, every little thing felt personal. 2 days after she told me, "You can't touch that, that's my husband," she filed my first official violation notice. Apparently, I had altered the historical exterior without approval. All I had done was repaint the porch railing using the exact same color, white. The notice came with a $150 fine and a reminder to attend the next HOA inspection meeting. The message wasn't about money, it was about control. I told myself to stay calm. I had moved here for peace, not a fight. But the next week, another notice arrived, this time for having unapproved outdoor equipment. The equipment? A ladder. It was leaning against the wall while I cleaned the gutters. By the third violation, I stopped believing this was a coincidence. Neighbors started acting strange too. The couple across the street who once waved every morning stopped making eye contact. The older man next door, the one who lent me a rake my first week, suddenly pretended he didn't know me. It was like someone had flipped a switch in the whole neighborhood. Then came the whispers. I'd step outside and hear voices drop, curtains move. A few even crossed the street to talk in hushed tones near Linda's mailbox. I knew what was happening. Linda was turning the community against me. A month after the first morning, she showed up again, clipboard in hand, HOA badge pinned perfectly to her blazer. She didn't even greet me, just scanned the porch, the yard, the tools lined up near the steps. "I need to document your modifications," she said flatly. I asked her what modifications she was talking about. She pointed to the new wood panels I had used to repair part of the foundation. "These don't match the historical records," she said, snapping photos. I told her the original wood was rotted. She said that wasn't the point. Authenticity, she told me, isn't about function. It's about legacy. Her words chilled me. Legacy? Whose legacy was she really protecting? The HOA or her husband? When she left, I checked the public property records. The farmhouse had indeed belonged to someone decades ago, a man named Thomas Whitfield. He died in the early 1980s. His wife's name was Linda. That's when everything made sense. Linda, the HOA president, was the widow of the man who built this house. After that, things only got worse. One morning I woke up to find orange spray paint on my fence, the letters Violation 4, stenciled in bold. That wasn't official. That was personal. A day later, I received another envelope from the HOA. This time it wasn't a warning, it was a hearing notice. They wanted to review my repeated disregard for community standards. I'd lived there barely 2 months. The meeting was scheduled for the following Wednesday at the Maple Creek Community Center. I almost didn't go, but curiosity got the better of me. When I walked in, there were 5 people seated behind a folding table. Linda sat in the center, like a judge, her hands folded neatly over a thick binder, my binder. Every photo she had taken, every complaint she had filed, every infraction, nicely cataloged. She read each one aloud, her voice calm and sharp, like she'd been rehearsing. By the end, they fined me nearly $900 for unsanctioned alterations, exterior violations, and non-compliance with Historical Code Section 8. When I tried to explain, she didn't look up, just smiled and said, "Some homes aren't meant to be changed."
After that meeting, I noticed something different about the farmhouse. It creaked more at night. Doors that I swore I'd closed would be open in the morning. Once, I found a single muddy footprint in the hallway, too large to be mine. I checked every lock, every window. Everything was secure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something didn't want me there. That night, I left a camera by the front door. The footage showed nothing unusual until 2:37 a.m. A shadow moved across the porch. Slow, deliberate, then gone. I rewound it twice, thinking maybe it was a trick of the light, but it wasn't. The shape paused near the railing, the same railing I had repainted. Linda's husband. The words echoed in my mind. "You can't touch that, that's my husband." I didn't believe in ghosts, but I did believe in obsession, and Linda had both. The next day, I called the county records office to verify ownership again. The clerk told me my title was perfectly valid. The HOA had no legal claim over the structure. Relieved, I thought I could finally fight back. So I wrote a letter to the HOA citing the official statutes that protected private homeowners from excessive interference. I sent copies to every neighbor's mailbox, hoping to show them I wasn't the villain Linda painted me as. 2 days later, someone slashed my tires. From there, the spiral began. I started receiving anonymous letters, no names, just bold block handwriting. "Leave it alone. He belongs here. You don't understand." The mailbox became a daily source of dread. I reported it to the local police, but without proof, there wasn't much they could do. They told me to install cameras, so I did, 4 of them, covering every angle of the house. For a few nights, everything was quiet. Then, on the 5th night, the cameras caught Linda standing at the edge of my driveway, staring at the front door again, just like before. She didn't move for nearly 5 minutes, just stood there, motionless. Then she turned and walked away. I decided to confront her. The next morning, I walked across the street to her house. Her yard looked perfect, not a single leaf out of place. The same clipboard sat on a small porch table. When I knocked, she opened a door instantly, as if she'd been waiting. She didn't invite me in, just stood there, smiling. "Is there something you wanted to discuss?" I asked her directly if she'd been on my property. Her smile didn't fade. She said, "I don't step onto what isn't mine. But that farmhouse, it was mine. Everything in it, everything built into its bones." Her voice trembled slightly at the end, and in her eyes, not anger, not malice, but grief. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. When I turned to leave, she said something that froze me in my tracks. "You shouldn't have taken his place." The HOA fines kept coming, each more ridiculous than the last. Grass height violation, unapproved restoration, incomplete landscaping plan. Every week, another envelope, another demand, another reminder that Linda wasn't going to stop. I tried contacting the HOA board directly, but every call went unanswered. It was clear Linda was the HOA. At one point, I even received a notice threatening property foreclosure if I didn't pay the accumulating fines. I laughed at the absurdity of it until I realized she'd already filed the paperwork. That's when the fear turned into fury. I started digging deeper into HOA bylaws, past meeting minutes, anything I could find. Most of it was routine, landscaping votes, noise complaints, budget allocations, but one entry stood out. A note dated nearly 20 years ago, written by Linda herself. "House at Lot 7, Whitfield property, to remain preserved indefinitely in memory of deceased spouse. Any future ownership must comply with preservation standards." Lot 7. That was my house. The entire HOA had been built around her grief. The rules were just extensions of her loss, weaponized into control. And she wasn't going to let anyone rewrite the story. I began documenting everything. Photos, recordings, timestamps. If Linda wanted a war of paperwork, I'd fight back with the same weapon.
But deep down, I knew this wasn't just legal anymore. It was psychological. The house felt heavier now, colder, like it was absorbing the tension. Even the wind that brushed through the trees carried whispers, faint, hollow, like memories refusing to fade. Still, I refused to leave, because every nail I hammered, every board I fixed, every light I turned on, it felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from peace. But the peace never lasted. One night, while reviewing camera footage again, I saw something new. A faint glimmer from the second-floor window. The same window of the master bedroom, the one that used to be Linda and her husband's room. I paused the video, zoomed in, and there it was, the shape of a woman standing behind the curtain. But I was downstairs, alone. The next morning, Linda filed yet another complaint, this time claiming I was disturbing community harmony, whatever that meant. That's when I knew. This wasn't just an HOA dispute anymore. It was a battle between the living and the past, and I wasn't sure which one Linda truly belonged to. The morning of the HOA's final hearing felt different. The air was heavy, the sky low and gray, as if even the weather had grown tired of this fight. A letter had arrived the day before, stamped "Final Notice." If I didn't appear at the community hall by 10 a.m., the HOA would proceed with property seizure under continued non-compliance. That wasn't even legal, but Linda wasn't dealing in legality anymore. She was dealing with power. For weeks, she'd used every rule, every clause, every ounce of authority to crush me into submission. But I wasn't going to let her win. Not after everything she'd done, the vandalism, the lies, the harassment. Not after she turned a home meant for healing into a battlefield. So that morning, I gathered my evidence, photos, camera footage, the property deed, and the line from her own HOA notes linking Lot 7 to her late husband. I wasn't just walking into a meeting, I was walking into the end of her reign. The community hall was already full when I arrived. Neighbors lined the folding chairs like an audience waiting for a performance. Some avoided my gaze. Others whispered behind hands. At the front, the same long table, same faces, same woman, Linda sitting dead center, clipboard in place, eyes cold and steady. She didn't say a word when I walked in. She just watched. I could feel the tension pressing in from every side, the weight of weeks of silent war. Then she spoke. "Mr. Whitfield?" She paused, correcting herself. "Mr. Carter, we're here to finalize the board's decision regarding your repeated violations." Her tone carried the same clipped precision as always, but this time something trembled beneath it. Not fear, not guilt, something else. Possession. She began reading off each infraction one by one, her tone steady and rehearsed. Unauthorized restoration, unapproved repairs, defacement of a historical property. Each accusation echoed through the hall like a gavel strike. When she finished, she looked up and smiled. "We, the board, have voted unanimously to impose full property reclamation under Section 9.2. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Even the other board members looked unsure. I stood up slowly, my voice calm but sharp. "With all due respect, you don't have the authority to seize private property. Section 9.2 was written for communal grounds, not private lots." Her expression didn't change. She said, "We have the right to protect community heritage." I shot back, "And I have the right to protect my home."
I laid the folder on the table. Each document thudded like a drumbeat. County deed, clean and legal. Title, confirmed and verified. Property survey, no HOA jurisdiction on the original map. Then, the final page, the one I'd found buried in the meeting minutes. A note written by Linda herself 20 years ago. Lot 7 to remain preserved indefinitely in memory of deceased spouse. Her eyes flickered when she saw it, just for a second. Then she looked up, face tightening. "That's taken out of context," she said. I didn't let her finish. "Context?
You built an entire HOA just to keep everyone away from your husband's house? You've harassed, fined, and threatened every person who dared live here. You didn't want preservation, you wanted control. The room went still. Linda's jaw tightened. You don't understand what this place means. You're tearing apart history. No, I said quietly. I'm rebuilding it. I reached into my folder again and pulled out a small USB stick. I plugged it into the projector the board used for presentations. The screen flickered to life. Security footage from my porch camera. At first, the crowd saw only static, then shadows. Then, at 2:37 a.m., the clear image of Linda standing on my property staring at the house. Then again 2 nights later. And again at dawn, touching the porch railing, the same one I'd repainted. Whispers erupted through the hall. Is that her? Someone said. She was trespassing? Another whispered. Linda's face went pale, her voice cracking as she stood. That's fabricated. I paused the video. You said you never stepped on what wasn't yours. So which is it, Linda? Were you lying then or now? The silence was suffocating. She tried to regain control, flipping through her papers like a drowning person grabbing at the air. You're twisting this. You think you can erase a man's memory with your cheap repairs and paint? Her words grew sharper, desperate. This was his house. Every beam, every nail, he built it for me. You don't belong here. None of you do. Her voice cracked. He's still here, you know, watching, protecting, and I won't let you destroy what's his. The room buzzed with uneasy murmurs. I stared at her, not with anger, but with something closer to pity, because in that moment it was clear. She wasn't fighting me. She was fighting time. I took a step forward, voice steady, but quiet enough that everyone had to lean in to hear. Linda, your husband's gone. What you're holding on to isn't love, it's control. You've turned his memory into a weapon. Her hands shook. The clipboard slipped and hit the floor with a hollow thud. Then something broke inside her. She screamed, not words, just a raw, hollow sound that filled the hall and froze everyone in place. Tears cut down her perfectly powdered face as she pointed at me. You don't understand. He promised he'd never leave. He said this house would stay ours forever. The board members looked horrified. Neighbors began whispering again, this time not in support, but disbelief. Linda's perfect image, the polished president, the guardian of order, cracked right there in front of everyone. Security arrived when she refused to sit down. They didn't touch her, just waited until her voice fell to a trembling whisper. When she finally sank back into her chair, she looked small, like someone who spent years living inside her own grief until it swallowed her whole. I gathered my paper silently, the echo of her words still hanging in the air. Before leaving, I turned to the room. This house isn't haunted, I said quietly. It's just been waiting for someone to let it live again. Then I walked out. By the next morning, the footage had spread through the entire neighborhood. Someone from the meeting had filmed the confrontation on their phone and posted it to the community forum. Hundreds of comments flooded in, most shocked, some angry, many sympathetic. The HOA board held an emergency session that afternoon. By evening, Linda was removed as president and suspended indefinitely for abuse of authority and misconduct. But the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt heavy, like watching a storm finally break, leaving behind silence and wreckage. That night, I returned home and stood on the porch. The same boards she'd once called his. The same house she'd tried to protect or possess. The air was still, the moonlight soft against the old wood. And for the first time since I'd moved in, the place felt calm. But then, as I turned to go inside, something caught my eye. The upstairs window, the master bedroom. The curtain shifted just slightly, like a hand brushing past. A chill ran through me. Was it the wind? A draft? Or something else still lingering in these walls? I stared for a long time and then smiled faintly. Maybe some promises do last forever, just not in the way we expect.
The next morning, a small envelope lay on my doorstep. No name, just a handwritten note inside. Thank you for taking care of him. I looked across the street. Linda's house was dark, empty, a for sale sign already in the yard. And as I stood there, the sun rising over the farmhouse, I realized something. The fight had never really been about ownership. It was about letting go. But peace doesn't always come easy in a place built on secrets, because just when I thought it was over, when I thought I could finally move on, something else happened that would change everything again. For days after the hearing, Maple Creek felt different. The tension that had wrapped itself around the neighborhood like barbed wire was gone. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was healing. People began talking again. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now waved. A few even apologized, saying they hadn't known what was really happening. Some brought small gifts, cookies, letters, even a few old photos of the farmhouse from when it was new. For the first time, the house felt like part of the community again. Linda's resignation became official within a week. The HOA board appointed an interim president, a quiet man named Harold, who'd lived there nearly as long as she had. His first announcement was brief. All pending fines against Lot 7 are voided, effective immediately. No apologies, no excuses, but the weight of that one sentence felt enormous. When I walked back home that evening, the air smelled like rain. I stood on the porch, the same porch I'd repainted, the same wood that had sparked so much chaos, and finally, it felt like mine. I spent the next few weeks finishing the restoration, slowly and deliberately. Every nail, every brushstroke carried a strange kind of peace. The farmhouse had been broken long before I arrived, not just the wood or the paint, but the memories buried inside it. Linda had kept it trapped in grief, refusing to let time move on. But now, it was breathing again. I replaced the last of the rotten boards, restored the windows, and added small touches of my own. A new weather vane on the roof, a bench beneath the old oak tree, lights that glowed warm through the night. And every morning, I'd wake to sunlight spilling through the windows, soft and golden, the kind that makes you forget there was ever darkness at all. One afternoon, I saw a moving truck across the street. Linda's house was finally being emptied. Boxes piled on the driveway, furniture wrapped in blankets, a few framed pictures stacked against the porch. Among them, I noticed something. A large photograph in a gold frame. It was of the farmhouse, my farmhouse. But in the photo, it looked alive, full of color, flowers lining the porch, a couple standing together on the steps. Linda and her husband. I asked one of the movers where she'd gone. "Assisted living," he said quietly. "Her family came a few days ago, said she'd been struggling for a while." I nodded, unsure of what I felt. Relief? Sadness? Pity? Maybe all three. I wanted to be angry. She'd made my life hell for months. But when I looked at that photo again, I couldn't be. All she ever wanted was to keep a promise. And somewhere along the way, she'd lost herself inside it.
That night, I took a walk through the house. No tools, no noise, just footsteps and quiet. Every creak, every whisper of the wood felt familiar now, like a conversation between old friends. When I reached the upstairs bedroom, the one that had once been theirs, I paused. The window was open slightly, the curtains swaying with the breeze. For a long moment, I just stood there, listening. There was no fear anymore, no unease, just stillness. And maybe it was my imagination, or maybe something more, but for the briefest moment, the air seemed warmer, like gratitude. I closed the window gently and whispered, "It's safe now." Then I walked downstairs, turned off the lights, and let the house sleep. Over the months that followed, Maple Creek began to change. Without Linda's iron grip, the HOA softened. Rules were rewritten. Meetings became friendlier, less about punishment, more about community. The man who took over as president, Harold, even came by one day with a clipboard, though this time it wasn't for violations. "We're thinking of turning the annual meeting into a barbecue," he said with a grin. "Less paperwork, more burgers." I laughed for the first time in a long while. The neighbors who'd once avoided me started stopping by, curious about the renovations. Some offered help, others just wanted to talk. It was strange. The same people who once feared breaking Linda's rules now wanted to be part of something real. And little by little, the farmhouse that had once divided the neighborhood began to unite it. About 3 months later, I decided to host an open house. Nothing formal, just coffee, pastries, and a small tour for anyone who wanted to see the restoration. I expected a handful of people to show up. Dozens came. As they walked through the rooms, I told them what I'd learned about the old architecture, the history, the stories buried in the wood. But I also told them something else, that homes aren't meant to be frozen in time. They're meant to be lived in, to evolve, to carry forward the lives of those who love them. A few people nodded quietly, some even teared up. By the time the last guest left, the house felt full, not of ghosts, but of laughter, of life. Late that evening, as the sky turned orange over the creek, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and looked across the street. Linda's house stood dark and empty, its windows blank. But for the first time, I didn't see hostility there. I saw peace. I don't know if she ever forgave me or herself, but I hope she found a way to let go. Because I did. A few months later, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was shaky, old-fashioned. The return address was a senior care facility 2 towns over. It was from Linda. "Mr. Carter, I don't expect you to forgive me. I wanted to say I'm sorry for everything. You were right. I'd let grief turn into something ugly. Thomas loved that house. He built every part of it with his hands, but I was the one who refused to let it breathe. I see now that holding on to him meant holding everything else hostage too. Thank you for fixing what I couldn't. Please take care of it. He'd be happy to know someone finally did." Signed, Linda. I read it 3 times, each one slower than the last. Then I folded it carefully and placed it inside a small box on the mantel, next to an old photograph I'd found tucked in one of the upstairs drawers. A picture of the farmhouse in spring, sunlight pouring over the porch. It felt right, somehow. Full circle.
The seasons changed. The trees turned gold, then bare, then green again. Life moved on, quietly, but with purpose. Sometimes, on cool mornings, I'd sit on the porch and hear faint laughter from the road, children playing, neighbors greeting each other. The same road that had once carried tension now carried life. And the farmhouse, that 120-year-old structure that had seen loss, love, grief, and rebirth,
stood stronger than ever. It wasn't just wood and nails anymore. It was proof that even the heaviest ghosts can be turned into foundations if you're willing to rebuild from them. Looking back, I realize it was never really about the HOA, or even Linda. It was about the way people cling to the past, how pain, when left unchecked, can disguise itself as righteousness, and how sometimes letting go isn't weakness, it's mercy. Mercy for what we've lost. Mercy for ourselves. The farmhouse taught me that. It taught me that healing doesn't always roar in. Sometimes it creaks through floorboards, whispers in quiet nights, and breathes through old walls that refuse to fall apart. And maybe that's the lesson Linda's husband left behind. Not to preserve the past, but to let it evolve. Now when I walk through the house, I can still feel their presence. Not haunting, not heavy, just there, like warmth from a fading fire. The kind that doesn't burn anymore, it just glows. And every time I pass the old photograph on the mantel, I whisper the same words. You can rest now. He's home. In the end, the fight wasn't about rules, fines, or power. It was about peace, the kind that doesn't come from winning, but from understanding. Some battles aren't meant to be fought. They're meant to be healed. So if you ever find yourself standing against something unfair, something that tries to take away your peace, remember this. You can rebuild what's broken. You can rewrite what's lost. And sometimes the loudest victory is silence.